the Wende Neen Show. Now here's your host, Wende Neen.
All right, our special guest today is Khalfani Yabuku, and he is, let me put my glasses on. He is a retired police commander of the Atlanta Police Department in Atlanta, Georgia. He has almost 35 years of law enforcement experience. He began his career in law enforcement as a military police officer, and that was in 1977. He joined the APD in 1984 and retired in 2011. After almost 28 years of service, he holds a BA degree in criminology and a master's degree in public administration, police management. He is the owner and operator, chief instructor of Atlanta-based Triple F Training, LLC, a company which teaches fitness, fighting, and firearms techniques to the law enforcement, military, and civilian communities. Welcome to the Wende Neen Show, Khalfani. Welcome to the Wende Neen Show.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me.
Have a seat.
Thank you.
I am so excited to have you here with what you have going on when the thin blue line begins to blur.
Yes, ma'am. Happy to be here with you.
That captures my attention every time I read it, and obviously if I read a little bit of it, I thank you for my copy of it. Now, from my understanding, you started out in Detroit with your desire to be in law enforcement. Is that correct?
Yes, as a child,
Oh, wow.
the only profession I ever desired to work in was law enforcement.
Really?
Yeah, I was so eager to become a cop that even in the 5th grade, I joined the safety guard. So I was a guy with the little orange belt helping you cross the street.
I remember those. Wow.
And keeping kids on the right side of the hallway as they traverse from class to class.
Okay.
So that was my first opportunity to actually wear a badge of authority.
Interesting.
And I took it, at that young age, I took it quite seriously, as a matter of fact.
Okay, so as I said, I've read a little bit of the book, and I'm very intrigued on how you kind of set the stage in the book. When I started reading it, I actually could put myself as if I was like behind you and watching, you know, what's going on. That's how detailed, I like how very specific you were with your wording. I think that's great. One of the chapters that I found very interesting talked about when you first got out of the academy. So I want to talk a little bit about that, but first, what made you write this book?
The persistent encouragement of several friends to tell my story. There are only two sides of policing being depicted in the media. That is a small portion of officers who are just rotten to the core. They're just criminals with badges, just bluntly put. And then you have the larger cadre of officers who actually go to work to do an honorable job, to do the right thing. They conduct themselves with honor and valor, but however, they tend to overlook and almost even condone some of the activities of the rogue officers that tend to work around them. And you never hear about the third type of officer, which is the officer who actually goes to work every day with the mindset that if it should come to it, then he will be accountable for policing other police officers. I felt that those officers needed a voice.
You mentioned there are criminals with badges. Now I do know, obviously, there are background checks, criminal background checks, psych exams. How do they get through the cracks? Do they become the criminal mind after the fact, or was it there all along and this was an opportunity? What do you think there?
I contend that they were that way. They had that disposition when they came onto the police department. The reason that they can go undetected is because you can't detect intent. Even in a psychological exam, it's easy to answer or to respond to the questions, if so to speak, in an acceptable fashion. So I mean, so it's I guess, for lack of a better way of saying it, it's not very difficult to trick the system in that sense.
Let's get into the book a little bit. So, to make sergeant, generally, what do you have to do to be awarded that role?
Yeah, sergeant would be considered a first line supervisor.
Okay.
So he is not actually in a position to dictate policy, to write policy per se.
Okay.
But he will be the person who is responsible for the carrying out of orders, policies, and things as directives, things of this nature that will come down from the command staff.
You were fresh out of the academy. There was an officer who was called, and everyone was kind of radioed as backup to a report to the scene. And he was in a foot chase with someone who obviously committed some form of crime. And when you all arrived to the scene, the perp was in the back of the patrol car in handcuffs, looking like any normal, average, everyday person. As I'm visualizing this and how you described in the book, then I look over at the actual officer, and he's there all scuffed up, scratches, bruises, trying to kind of gather himself. So what I assumed was maybe there was some type of a physical altercation that occurred between he and the perp.
Correct.
And then I hear the sergeant says to everyone there, you know, like there's a problem with the way that the perp is looking versus how that officer is now appearing. And he gave an indication that he would kind of circle the block a little bit for 5 or 10 minutes, but he'll be back.
Correct.
And when he returns, he did not want to see the imbalance that was currently in place at that time. And when he did return, there was no longer an imbalance. Everything had balanced out. The perp was in very bad shape at that point, very similar to that officer.
Correct.
And the understanding was given that he should not have to arrive and see this ever again.
Correct.
What is going on there? Because I see everything wrong with that, and especially for you coming out of the academy and then having to, see this and hear it.
Correct.
What are you thinking at that point? I mean, I don't think you expected that.
Right, right. And to some degree, I believe that whole performance was put on to my benefit to some degree to indoctrinate me into the concept of the brotherhood, the fraternity, the thin blue line.
Wow.
We take care of each other. If someone hurts one of us, we hurt one of them.
Did you take it that way?
Well, of course not, because unfortunately I was not the blank slate to be written upon, to be transcribed upon the way I guess a typical officer would be, because I had my military experience behind me. I had, growing up in Detroit, seen some of the flagrant violations of human rights that were committed by Detroit police, which is one of the things that motivated me to want to be a cop in the first place, was to try to correct or to set right that system of law enforcement, but from within law enforcement. I know my mother would call it a crime shame.
I would agree with her.
We do. We find ourselves as black officers. You find yourself in a position where, particularly if you're a black officer serving a predominantly black population, you don't want to give the appearance to your coworkers, to your white coworkers, that you are showing favoritism towards someone just because they're black. You don't want to give the appearance that you're being easy or going easier on your folks, so to speak, to where I think they wind up being even a greater threat to the black community than the most racist white officers. Let me go back and say, first of all, when I speak, I'm speaking in general terms. So I'm not speaking about all black officers.
Okay? Yes, absolutely.
That actually is a small minority, but if it's one, it's too many as far as I'm concerned.
I totally agree.
Okay.
Now, I've talked to some officers before, actually APD, and they have mentioned when they're in a foot chase, very similar to what we were just talking about that's in your book. Then when you do finally catch up to them, you're mad and angry at the fact, I had to chase you.
Right.
And it's taken out on that person.
Correct.
At that point, do you see that as, would they be colorblind? Is it truly because I'm angry because I had to go through this? Because I'm not in the condition I used to be when I came out of the academy. And I'm huffing and puffing all because you chose to run.
Right.
Or do you stand back and look at that as there's always another day? Does that ever come to mind, or is that where that line becomes blurred?
Yeah, that's definitely where one of the places that the line tends to blur. I used to caution officers, younger officers, all the time, to not take things personal like that. I guess it's a commonly known thing in law enforcement. If I gotta chase you, if I have to go through the inconvenience of having to get out of my patrol car and actually run you down a couple city blocks, then you're going to pay the price for that when I catch you. I think when that happens, I think officers are really taking it way too personal.
Yeah.
I think you really have to assert or reassert every day, and I say it because this was my common practice. Every day when you get up with that uniform on, you have to reassert, you have to reevaluate exactly why you're wearing that uniform. And if it is indeed to go out there to serve and protect, then you should conduct yourself accordingly.
So you talk about uniform. I think, and this could just be my opinion, is that some people, based on, because we know childhood follows us in things and choices and decisions that we make and kind of make us who we are and how we react to certain things. So if I'm someone who maybe all my life, maybe I've been bullied, maybe I've had low self-esteem, maybe I didn't really think much of myself, and now this is my opportunity to put myself out there. And when I get that uniform on, I expect you to do as I say in anything that I say. I have power now. I have a weapon on my side that I can use and get away with it, but you can't. Do you think that happens sometimes?
Oh, that's for sure.
I'm powerful now.
That is a dynamic that you can see in every profession across the board. Yeah, even someone who may be the chairman of a board of a major corporation, if they were a kind of person, excuse me, who were, as you said, bullied or somewhat someone who was disregarded as they were growing up, and then they finally get into that position of authority or perceived power, and now it's payback on the whole world.
Right.
Yeah. Law enforcement is not immune from that. So you're going to have that in law enforcement, and you will see that.
Tell us about Herndon Homes. What's your take on that experience?
On that particular incident that I relate in the book, is treat people the way you want to be treated, and more times than not, you'll be rewarded for it. The long and short of it, without getting into too much detail in the book, I had a situation where I was in a position to violate someone, basically. I would have been, it would have been acceptable under the practices of the department, but I chose to take a different route. There are some times when, in law enforcement, when we have to stop being apologetic and we have to call a spade a spade.
Interesting. How can our viewers find your book?
It's available right now in ebook on Amazon, as well as Barnes & Noble, as well as Apple iTunes. And the paperback can actually be ordered online through Amazon and Barnes & Noble.
Awesome. Well, I tell you, I have my copy, so you definitely need to go out and get yours. It's a very interesting read. I think you did a very good job. He goes in depth with a lot of information on here. And always remember, this is how we do it. It is what it is. It is done. Until next time, au revoir.